Welcome in to Locked On Knicks and welcome in to draft season. That's right. The season is over. We've had enough time to mourn. It's time to get into the draft primer, and I've got some great guests to do it with today.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks, and I want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode, because it might be the off season, but we're still here for you guys 5 days a week. No rest, no off season for us. It's still the on season as far as we're concerned. But the best part of the off season, as we all know, is draft time. We've had a little time to process the playoff loss, game 7, all that stuff. But, they were injured. It's fine. They'll beat the Pacers next year. The Pacers got their butts handed to them. It was cathartic in its own little way. But now it's time to start talking about the draft, because the Knicks have 3 draft picks in this coming draft. And I think there's a decent chance they're going to use at least one of them. Finally, we might finally have a rookie on the Knicks after 2 long years of not making a draft pick. So I brought on some great guests to talk about that with today. No better 2 guys that I could think of to do the initial draft primer, to give you guys some guys to think about than Corey Tulaba and Albert Ghim from No Ceilings, one of my favorite draft coverage websites. I've got these 2 guys on this episode. This turned into a 3-parter. I went in thinking, this will probably be about 2 parts. There's 3 parts. It was a huge, huge episode that we did. But we start off talking about just the philosophy of this draft. Is this truly a, quote, bad draft? Which it's being touted as by a lot of people, that it's like there's not a lot of top-end talent. You're going to struggle to scrape out good NBA players out of this draft. But Corey and Albert don't really think so. And we sort of talk about that and the philosophy for the Knicks, what they should be looking to do in this draft. So I won't hold this up any further. Let's get right into it with Corey and Albert right now. All right, as promised, it is draft season, and it's time for a Knicks draft primer. And I couldn't think of any 2 guys that I would rather bring on than my 2 buddies from No Ceilings here. We've got Albert Ghim and Corey Tulaba. You might know him from the Draft Podcast. That's like $DRFT with No Ceilings, which is, in my opinion, the cool. No matter what you think about everybody's takes or whatever on any draft place, No Ceilings, I think, has the most aura of any draft website out there. So if you like to go to a site that looks cool as hell and also has tons of smart analysis, definitely check it out. It's where I'm going to be doing a lot of reading for the next few weeks leading up to the draft, or I guess about a month. So we have almost a month until the draft. But guys, how are you doing? How's the draft cycle treating you? I feel like I'm just getting into it because the Knicks just got eliminated from the playoffs. So this is a whole new world for me. But you guys have been at this for a while. I'll start with Albert, and then Corey, if you want to give your take too. Like, what is your scouting process been like for this current draft class, one which has been, as we'll talk about in a minute, sort of panned in many ways. It's been maybe a little polarizing in some ways. There's a lot of opinions going around about the quality of this draft class, about what type of players you can get, whatever. It seems like a pretty interesting one to cover.
No, I 100% agree. First off, appreciate you having us back on. It's been some time, but excited to talk because, like you, lifelong Knick fan. And so living through that playoff run was a lot of different emotions. But I think with this class specifically, as you said, right, there are all kinds of opinions and takes on the strength of this class. And I think I find myself, even like throughout the year, as we've been scouting this class, I find myself kind of going back and forth. And I think where I've landed is, I think it's somewhere in the middle And we'll talk more in depth about how we feel about this class, but it's been a wild one. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a more challenging draft class, I think, in my opinion, in certain ways, I guess. But excited to be here, excited to talk Knicks, excited to talk about what the Knicks might end up doing. And I'm sure Corey feels the same.
I do feel the same. I think that people are typically a little hyperbolic on the internet. I don't know if that's a hot take these days, or not. I know Stephen A. Smith has
on ElonMuskX.com. You think people are hyperbolic? No way.
No. I mean, look, Stephen A. Smith has a documentary on sports journalism, and I think what's wrong with it. So, what world are we living in at this point? But I think that there is some truth into it from the perspective of like sometimes there are just like punch you in the mouth. This dude is an all NBA player, and there's not really a risk in taking this guy, right? Like obviously Victor Wembanyama was like that. I personally think Chet Holmgren was like that. Luka was like that. Like, there are just guys that you're like, there's no way that this guy's not awesome. So, like, by and large, if you have one of those guys, people are typically going to look at the draft as a little bit stronger because there is a prize. Because at the end of the day, the draft is about hope. It's about, we just endured a really tough season. And what was it for? Oh, it was because our future is going to be bright because we get the shiny new toy that comes in is going to be, the next superstar face of the league. And we know that the reality a lot of times is that's easier said than done, even for these guys that are hyped up. Cade Cunningham had a lot of that hype. He was one of said prospects, and, Detroit just endured an entire season of losing to end up with the 5th pick after falling in the lottery. But this is the type of draft where maybe that doesn't sting as much because there isn't that prize necessarily waiting for you at pick 1. That prize might be there at 5. That prize might be there at 12. It might be there at 24. This is the kind of draft where the talent level, there isn't necessarily these super large gaps. And like Albert said, that makes it challenging at times, but there's also a little bit of freedom in it. And I think one of the cool things that we've seen as people who cover the draft and as this space grows with enthusiasts is that this is the kind of draft where like it's okay to stray from quote unquote consensus because there isn't really one. So like if you have a guy that you really like, it's like, you know what? I'm going to have this guy in my top 10 or my top 5 because like, if I'm going to swing, like, why is this guy a worse swing than this other guy? Just because this one kid had a higher RSCI ranking coming into, his college or, alternative freshman season playing in the G League or NBL or whatever, like, screw it. I'm going to go with my gut. And I think that that's been cool to see because people are more passionate about their takes and they're more willing to go out on a limb. And I think that that's cool because ultimately, even in these drafts where people think that these things are a lock to go a certain way, like last year when Scoot Henderson was this generational prospect who was a no doubt he'd be the number 1 pick in any other draft, and he's going to come in and he struggled this year. And like now all of those Charlotte fans that were really upset that they selected Brandon Miller are like, oh, maybe we actually got the right guy, So like the draft is unpredictable in a lot of ways. And a lot of it, there are things that just, you can be a team like the Knicks in 2018 and you can draft and swing for hope and maybe not have a lot of luck. And then you could be the Knicks in 2024 or 2022 and take guys who end up contributing in the playoffs who weren't as sexy. So like, that's the cool thing about the draft. There is no wrong or right that like you can just do a formula or an equation and be like, oh, EPM, this guy's the best guy on the floor. Like that doesn't really exist in the draft. You can do your best, but there's an unpredictability and a variability. And this year it's been really cool to watch how different opinions are, and definitely on some of the guys we're going to touch on today, and see how passionate people are for or against. And even within the No Ceilings crew, which, is pretty large these days. Feels like we're the NWO, with the Wolfpack at this point. But yeah, this has been a cool year just from the perspective of it's a lot more unpredictable and people are a lot more willing to actually step out on a limb.
All right, we'll be right back in to talk about the Knicks strategy and what the Knicks should be looking to do in this draft to close out the show. But first, I got to remind you all that today's show is brought to you by Game Time. And I don't know if you're familiar with Game Time. Do you like going to live events? I like going to live events. I find it to be a lot of fun. And when I do, I often don't make that decision well in advance. It's one of my fatal flaws as a person is I am very much a in the moment sort of game goer, concert goer. I decide within a day or two, like, hey, that sounds kind of fun. So I'm not usually the far in advance person, and that can sometimes kill you, but not with Game Time. That's because Game Time offers you last minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You can also get flash deals. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of a game or event. Or you can even get zone deals, which is very similar to maybe you've seen this on hotel apps before. You could save even more when you just choose a section and let Game Time choose your seats for you. So there's all kinds of great ways to save money with Game Time and get some tickets, even if you do it at the last minute. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time if you want, or maybe just go to a concert in the New York area. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Yeah, so I'm actually I'm gonna throw this right back to you, Corey, in just a sec, because the direction I wanted to go here sort of builds on what you were just saying there. So I want to get your take on this. Like, I feel like we hear so often that a draft is a quote unquote weak draft or a quote unquote strong draft, and sometimes that comes to be. Sometimes you get the 96 class or the 2003 class, or I guess you could say 2018 is looking pretty strong in the all-timer list now. You get these classes that you get multiple all-stars out of, very stacked top of the draft or whatever, but you see so often too, like you said, sometimes 2021, for example, everybody was like, this is a all-timer draft class, and that hasn't really come to fruition yet. Like, it just there's been some really good players out of there and some guys that clearly still have some tantalizing talent that just haven't quite put it together yet. Including the guys that were considered to be like the no-brainer for sure, multi-time all-stars, whatever. It just doesn't look like they're maybe on that path yet. So, we see these like quote bad drafts come up, I want to say like every 3 or 4 years. And like, one of the ones that I always think of would be like 2013, for example. But even in 2013, for as bad as the top of that draft was, you had Giannis Antetokounmpo come out of it. And, it was one of the best stabs in the draft of all time. For as much as 2020 got panned, you've got a guy in the conference finals, and while you just had two guys in the conference finals from that class that were leading their teams, and that was a class that everybody going in was like, oh, it's pretty weak. Like, Anthony Edwards looks good, but what about the like work ethic or whatever? And this, that, the other. People had so many, myself included, I panned the crap out of Tyrese Halliburton, for example, and he's worked out pretty good because he had stuff in his bag that people didn't realize he was going to have. The Knicks themselves even found a guy in that draft, and Emmanuel quickly. So I guess this is all to say, like, what are your guys' thoughts on the label of bad draft? And do you sort of feel like I do, where I'm kind of just throwing that away anymore? And just kind of my general thought is like, there is an all-star in there somewhere. Like, almost every draft produces a guy that makes at least an all-star team or two. And I think there always is one of those guys. And no matter what, like, if you look hard enough and you scout good enough, you can find that guy. So Corey, since you were just kind of going on that, headed down this path a second ago, I'll throw that to you first. What do you think as far as the bad draft label, which this draft is definitely, at least on the surface level, getting that rep at this point, where people are saying the top level talent is not that good, and you're probably not going to find an all-star caliber talent in this draft, which would then make it a non-life changing quote unquote bad draft.
Yeah, I think that it's foolish to say that there's not going to be any all-stars that come from this draft. I think that we've seen through history, and We had our own Tyler Rucker from No Ceilings today write a piece called "How Can We Find the Hope in 2024?" And one of the things he does is he goes through like a 20-year time frame from 2000 to 2020, and like every draft has all-stars in there. These guys emerge, and you mentioned the Giannis draft. I think that was a weird time. I don't know if Giannis would have gone as late as he did in 2024, given the more access that everyone has to these guys around the world. So I think that was a really unique situation. So I'm not expecting there to be a Giannis level prospect in this class necessarily. And even in 2020, when we were like, this draft isn't that great, we all knew like Anthony Edwards had superstar upside. LaMelo Ball has superstar upside. James Wiseman had superstar upside. It's just like, are they going to reach it? One guy absolutely did. One guy I think we're still on the fence about, and one guy absolutely did not. So like, but there are other guys that emerged in that draft, like you mentioned, Tyrese Halliburton, which I'm guessing is going to have to be bleeped out, that name, throughout the rest of this podcast. But
yes,
I think that there are going to be all-stars that emerge. I mean, I just think it's going to be the guy. I don't think it's going to be guys that people necessarily expect it to be. Like Albert and I, doing what we do at No Ceilings, we get to go to cool things like the Nike Hoop Summit. And, we got to see all of the quote unquote top players in this class practice for a week last 2 Aprils ago now, I guess. And we were like, all right, like, I don't know if I necessarily see that this guy should be number one, that guy should be number two. And, we ended up being a little bit lower on some of the guys that were ranked higher. So it's not really surprising to us that, there aren't guys that slap you in the face, but there are some guys in this class that do have such tantalizing talent. There are always guys in college that emerge that stay a little bit longer. I mean, like there are going to be guys that people have these rules about that you can't break in the scouting community. Like, hey, you can't draft a guy high that is under 6'3" because 6'3" guards don't succeed. And then Jalen Brunson goes in the second round, even though he's the best player on national title teams in college and is a superstar. Like that is going, maybe not that exact scenario. I'm not going to try to pitch Tyler Kolek or KJ Simpson as a guaranteed superstar or anything. But like when we look back in hindsight and then we go, oh, you know what? It does make sense that this guy turned out the way he did because he was an unbelievable college player who did a lot of winning. And like, okay, so we just overthought this one. That's always going to happen. And there are going to be guys that we overthought, and we're going to fall in love with athleticism and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of guys in this draft that still can play basketball and they can do it at a high level. And some of those guys are going to take their games to the next level because they end up in the right situation. And part of that is the unpredictability of the draft. We don't know where these guys are going to end up yet. One of the things that I've always wanted to do conceptually is do a post-draft big board where you can change the way that you think guys are going to develop based on where they end up, because I think that's part of the evaluation of these guys. If some Jaden Ivey ending up in Detroit is like, that fit's not great, I don't know how this is going to end up. But if he went to somewhere else where it was maybe a little bit more conducive to his game, maybe right now he's looked at a lot differently as far as his potential to become like an all-star player and take a leap, because he still has that same potential that he had in the draft. He's just not developing the way that we envisioned it. So I think those guys are going to emerge though in this draft, and it might be 2 of them, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4, but there are going to be guys in this draft class that make all-star teams at points during their career for sure.
Before I even get into my answer, I do want to say, I think Corey deserves a round of applause. He came out just guns blazing. I thought we were doing like intros at the beginning, and he just came out shooting. So love the energy. I love this. It's fantastic. And just to kind of piggyback off of what Corey just said, I really do think like, okay, at the core of the draft, at the core of the ESPN trade machine, at the core of everything that we talk about during the offseason, free agency madness, the reason why everyone has the alerts on for Woj tweets is because of that word, right? That you guys mentioned earlier, hope. Everyone's looking for hope. Whether you've won a title or you lost in the conference finals or you didn't make the playoffs at all, I feel like every team is looking for hope. Even the defending champions last year, Denver, when they got into the draft, they also were looking for hope, and they took some swings on some guys that kind of, we still don't know, right? Guys like Strother, guys like whoever, I don't even remember who else they drafted last year. But regardless of that, teams are looking for hope. And I think if we get into the semantics of whether or not this class is strong or not, it really depends on who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to somebody who's looking for a world-eating monster, like I don't know, like a Zion Williamson or an Anthony Davis, then I think it is fair to say that maybe this class is a little bit on the weaker side, because we don't have any of those guys in this class, in my opinion, right? But whether it's Tyler Rucker from No Ceilings or Pierre, who talked about it recently, Pee Wee the Plug, who talked about it on his YouTube channel, there are definitely guys that are going to contribute to NBA teams. And with something that I wrote about recently, I wrote a piece on PJ Hall from Clemson. And I was talking about how in this class, I feel like this is where GMs have to fill out the rest of their rosters. And this is where you might find a seventh guy, an eighth guy, a ninth guy, a two-way guy. But these guys may end up contributing to your team. And on your pod specifically right now, as we're talking about the New York Knicks, there are going to be some guys, I think, in this class that could potentially even play for Tibbs. And I know everyone likes to think that Tibbs doesn't like to play young guys, but sometimes circumstantially he's had to. And I think there might be some guys in this class, whether they're upperclassmen or whatever, that may actually be able to contribute to this team. And I know, Alex, you have some guys that you want to talk to us about and you want to bring up, and we'll get into it. But just going back to the original question, I do feel like, once again, it depends on who you're talking to. If the hope that you're looking for is a number one guy who's going to be a perennial all NBA guy, make 10 to 15 all-star teams and do all of that, then you're probably going to look at this class and say that it's weak. And we've heard it everywhere, whether it's the Ryan Russillo pod or other pods where they talk to NBA GMs and they say stuff like, well, this draft, it's kind of like a normal draft where the draft starts at pick 7 or pick 10. Right. And that's how NBA front office execs might be perceiving this class. And it's because exactly that, right? Because we don't have a world eating monster in this class. But once again, I think if you were talking to the Knicks specifically, right, and you were talking to someone like, I don't know, Walt Perrin, right, he might tell you that this might be where I make my money, where I get to work and show off what I'm capable of, because there are going to be some guys in this class that I think will be able to contribute to real contending teams next year, is kind of where I'm at. So somewhere in the middle.
Things that I love to hear personally. So, maybe now we could start getting into the Knicks aspect of this a little bit. And I want to talk sort of conceptually about them first as a team and where they're at right now, what I would be doing. And then, Albert, I'm especially curious what your thoughts are on this, because I know when we were talking about this before the show, you were like, I don't know, I'm kind of conflicted on what the Knicks should do. And I'm like, I kind of am too. And, there's a part of me that looks at this draft and is telling myself, don't get your hopes up. Like, this is a team that has traded out of the draft 2 years in a row. And, for various circumstances, obviously, like the 2 years ago, I know I was less than thrilled with them trading out of the early teens pick twice that they did to ultimately clear the money that turned into Jalen Brunson. But now I'm willing to say, who cares? It turned into Jalen Brunson. So they did what they had to do and they made that work. And then last year, I guess feeling that there wasn't anybody that particularly interested them, they got out of that draft as well. And it wasn't quite that simple. I mean, they turned one pick into Josh Hart. The other one did convey because the Mavs tanked. But I sort of had a feeling that they wouldn't have made that pick even if it conveyed to them via the Mavs anyway, just based off how things have been going. And they didn't make any effort to they certainly didn't make any effort to get back into the draft last year. Let's put it that way. But this year, I was starting to do a little bit of off-season prep and, breaking down, like I did an episode where I just set out like baseline goals, like what should the Knicks be looking to do? And it's like, get OG Anunoby and Isaiah Hartenstein on new contracts. Like, first and foremost, those are 2-year starters. You got to lock that up. But like number 2 for me, even more so than like start scouring the trade market, was trim the fat a little bit on this roster. Like, I think that they used a lot of end of bench spots, and they have been for a couple years under Leon Rose. I don't want to be a jerk, like everybody's trying to make it in the NBA, whatever, but they felt like favors. Like the last
Mm,
couple spots on the roster, they felt like it was guys that you're like, these guys are glorified G League players. Like there's probably no real case for giving them a real roster spot other than like, let's do good by them. Let's do good by their agent. They've been here on our G
yeah,
League team. Like they're good in practice or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And, that includes like um, Charlie Brown Jr., who was on a two-way, I believe. You had like Diakite on a full deal towards the end of the year, which is not a guy that I would have like handed a full contract to. Even like Jericho Sims, for example, or Daquan Jeffries, like those guys have been around for a little bit, but I'm like, I like Jericho Sims as far as 58th picks go. He's far exceeded
sure.
expectations, but not a guy that I feel like I have to stay married to for the life of his deal, which could be one more year, especially in favor of potentially drafting someone at 24, 25, and or 38. Like they have 3 picks coming up in this draft, and I think maybe 2021 is the year we can look to as far as inspiration for like the Knicks under this front office are not averse to making 3 picks in a draft. They want the situation to be right, and they need to have no other things they need to accomplish, which this year I don't think they really do have anything they need to accomplish. They don't have to clear cap space. They don't have to do anything like that. So they shouldn't have to like weaponize these picks in any way. Personally, I think they should use the picks, and what they use those picks on, what archetypes of players is the bigger question.
Mm.
But Albert, before we get into like the archetypes and various players and stuff, like how do you feel from a Knicks perspective about like, would you be looking to potentially bring 3 rookies onto this team? Or are you thinking like, maybe try to consolidate a little bit? Like this would be the draft that would kind of be ripe for moving up because
Mm.
there's so much parity that like if you have your guy and you want to ensure you get him, pay your 24th and 25th pick to move up to 18 or something. And some team will jump at that because they'll be like, oh, we got 2 guys we like. That'll definitely be there. But how are you just feeling kind of on the baseline before we get into like the archetypes and stuff?
I think my initial thought is, according to everyone on Twitter, there's no point in this conversation because it looks like we're going to ship 24 and 25 out for Mikal Bridges or something like that. So I don't know. I don't exactly know what that looks like or what's actually going to happen. And I know that everything's on the table. And me personally, I actually love that Leon doesn't ever talk to anybody. I like that he keeps all his cards really close to his chest, his vest. And I know like it can be frustrating for people like us that need to create content and talk about what the Knicks are going to do. But the fact that we don't actually know much at all, I think is kind of a beautiful thing sometimes. And I think to your point, we really don't know. Like the Knicks literally could just draft 3 rookies and they'll just do it. Or they could package and move up, or they could just move back and collect more assets for the future, right? Let's say there's a team back into the first round or even the second round doesn't have first round pick, and they go, hey, we want 24, we'll give you future assets for it, right? I don't think Leon would be opposed to that, or this front office. So I think it's really up in the air. As you mentioned, I think priority 1 is probably going to be OG. I highly doubt, like someone recently, I don't remember where I read it, but they're like, oh, the Knicks, they could just lose OG and it'll be a thing. And I was like, well, I don't think our front office would have given up RJ Barrett, Manuel quickly to lose OG Anunoby. I just don't think we function in that way anymore. I'm pretty sure, and this might just be me, but I don't think it's crazy to say that they probably have like a deal already on the table and they're all good to go, right? So I can't imagine us losing OG. I really can't imagine us losing Hartenstein either, just with how important he was for us in the playoffs. And obviously with Mitch and his injury stuff, we kind of need Hartenstein back, right? But you mentioned some really important names because for me, when I was thinking about what are some, moves on the fringes that we can make to kind of improve this team, the first name that came up for me was Jericho Sims, right? And the reason why is I just don't understand. Like, look, like you said, right? For a 58th pick, he's done his job. right? He's given us minutes when we've needed them. When Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson were out with injuries, he was a starter for us. He played minutes for us. I totally get that. It's just he's not much of a defender. He's not much of a rebounder. He's really athletic. I think we can replace that is kind of where my head is at. And whether that's at 24 or 25 or even later at 38, or we trade back and spend an even later second round pick on another big, I like the idea of us improving that third center spot, especially if we're going to keep Mitchell Robinson. Now, of course, that's a totally different discussion. We don't know what's going to happen with that, right? There might be a world where the Knicks ship out Mitch as a part of a package to go get somebody. I don't know. But if we are keeping Mitchell Robinson and Hartenstein together, I'd like a third center that we can actually rely on. And I know that's like such a luxury. And how many teams in the NBA actually have a third center that they feel like they can throw out there and play, real minutes for them? But the position that we're in right now with the contracts, and like the Dante contract we have him on is just unbelievable value, right? And we have some good values, and Bogdanovich, we'll see what happens. But I feel like this roster is so strong that we can talk about having the luxury of having like a pretty good starting, not a starting, but a really good third center is kind of where my head is at. But as you mentioned, whether it's Daquan Jeffries or Shake Milton or whoever we have at the end of the bench, I'd like to kind of swap those guys out and get someone stronger that could potentially even play for us. But then at the same time, what are we talking about? We're talking about 12 guys on the bench, and generally those guys don't really offer a ton, but I do like the idea of us potentially improving that. So my ultimate answer is this: 24, 25, it could happen, right? We could spend those picks and take some guys, but at the same time, if we move up and let's say this front office, they go, we want to find a legitimate big, right? Or we want to find a 3-and-D wing for the future. Maybe we move up to 14. Maybe we move up to 13. I could see that too. But if you put a gun to my head and you were like, what do you think the Knicks are actually going to do? My guess would be that they might just trade out or trade back is kind of where my head is at right now, if I had to guess. But the more exciting answer would be definitely to move up or package something into a trade.
Of course. And, I'm sure the whole they're going to trade those picks for Mikal Bridges will not die down at all. I made a pretty solid case the other day that whatever move, if they want to make a star move, they should probably do it before the new league year, just because of all these really punitive luxury tax things that are about to kick in. So if they want to trade for Mikal Bridges, or they want to, trade for like Paul George, for example, and extend him or something like that, it would behoove them to do that before the league year turns over. So that then once they start handing these contracts out to OG Anunoby and Isaiah Hartenstein and all that, they already have all the cards in place ready to play, rather than having to still draw another one before they do that. But Corey, I know you're in a room with two Knicks fans. You don't express a Knicks fan allegiance per se, but you are in the area and you keep up with the team. And so I'm curious your opinion as well. Like, what do you, if you were Leon Rose and Walt Perrin, what's your overall philosophy going into this draft with those three picks at your disposal?
Yeah, I think my thing, it would be it gives them flexibility, which is something that I think they do well with. And the thing that I think goes underrated, whether we're talking about the draft or whether we are talking about free agency, it is like the aspect of team building, in not like making additions because it's cool to see it pop up on Woj's timeline, but to actually full on dive into the concept of building an actual team that has a culture. And so like the Knicks have done that, as well as anybody. I look around the league, it's like, I don't know, OKC obviously has done a great job building out what their culture is. And so the first thing, like when I ask myself, what are they going to do? I'm going to be like, well, does this fit what they have been doing? Because I don't think the Knicks are going to operate the same way that, say, like Brooklyn did when they had their little run of like their cute little D'Angelo Russell season and people loved it. And then all of a sudden they shipped everybody out just so they can, bring in superstars or whatever. And then, everything imploded because they were building towards something and then shifted perspective. Like that's not in the way that I think the Knicks are going to operate. So like if I'm looking at what they're going to do in the draft, I'm going to go like, does this fit philosophically with what the Knicks are building, the kind of players they're going after, the kind of personalities that they value. And if it's like looking at it from like, what would they do in a trade or free agency, I'd be like, all right, well, like clearly they're interested in Mikal Bridges. One, he's awesome. And two, I think they value the chemistry of the Nova Knicks. Like this is not a secret. I think it's obvious. And I think it's smart because they all fit together. They play for each other and they have chemistry and they all fit into this modern game. But, without going into like that kind of specifics of how they accomplish that, because I don't have enough information behind the scenes. Like, I think on the surface, I don't think you can ever have enough like shooters and maybe shooters that are like have a little more functional size than a Dante DiVincenzo and a Jalen Brunson. Like I think the backcourt maybe could stand to, get a little bit bigger. So like bigger shooter, maybe even somebody who can handle the ball a little bit confidently when, a guy like Brunson, is being draped guys draped all over him, relieve the pressure. And then, I don't think they specifically would, go for, a stretchy kind of big necessarily. I think they like playing the kind of bigs they play, but I think that there are maybe some guys who are Knicks kind of guys. So maybe they're not the third center. Maybe they actually turn into the second center because Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively, I think, are boosting the trade value of one Mitchell Robinson as athletic, vertical, shot blocking centers and the value of that around the league. So, I think they just have flexibility, and I think that they should take that flexibility into draft night. This is the first draft where the second round is going to be on a separate night, and they're going to be able to reconvene and strategize, and they'll have time in between picks. And like maybe that second round pick isn't a toss up, and maybe their guy that they really like is probably going to be available then. So if they trade up, packaging the picks, or they trade out or whatever, they're comfortable attacking the second round in a really smart way. Ultimately, these guys are going to be guys that are going to be developing either on the bench or in Westchester. Deuce McBride didn't play until he replaced somebody, and then he was a mainstay in the lineup, right? Like, there's no reason to believe that anybody in this draft is going to all of a sudden take Julius Randle's spot, take Jalen Brunson, DiVincenzo, OG, Hartenstein, blah, blah, blah. The expectation should not be like, can we get an impact player now? It's like, can we get somebody who fits into the culture, that fits into the vision in the long term, adds an asset to the team, and like maybe will help down the line on a cheap contract. But all in all, that just goes back to the flexibility of everything. And I think making smart moves like giving giving him that contract before he kind of broke out. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, I just think they've operated in a really slick, calculated way. And part of that has to do with the flexibility that they have. They felt confident moving off of Emmanuel quickly and the money he's going to demand because they developed Deuce McBride. Like they knew what they had already because they had watched it every day. And part of that goes back to the culture that they're building because they knew Deuce McBride was a hard nosed, lunchbox, hard hat kind of guy. Those are the guys that are okay and don't feel entitled and are willing to earn their spot down the line. And I think that's kind of how they should continue to attack and build this thing, is by targeting those kind of guys.
Yeah. And, to go back to something that Albert said a second ago too, I think that this conception that Tibbs does not, or perception, I guess, that Tibbs does not play young guys, does not play rookies, I think is pretty unfounded as well. Like, he might not play your favorite rookie as much as you want him to. Like, he's going to make him earn every literal second that he's on the floor. But he also, dating back a number of years, he played Emmanuel Quickly a solid amount his rookie year, which if you read some of the articles that have been written about that since, that was sort of an accident. Like, Quickly just sort of forced his way into that by playing so well in the preseason that Tibbs could not play him. So there's that. There was Obi Toppin, for as much as some people belly ached, myself included sometimes, about what his minutes were and whatever. he did give him a pretty fair shake if you look at it, in the long term. And then Quentin Grimes, played his way into a starting role and then played his way out of a starting role. So, it goes both ways. And then, Deuce McBride, like all the way back to his rookie year, in emergency situations was getting trusted to potentially start games sometimes when it was needed. And then, he kind of faded back and then, came back up this year after that trade and just asserted himself. And Tibbs does respect if someone comes out there, rookie or not, and proves they belong. Like that's all he needs to see. But if you obviously get a shorter leash if you're one of those guys because he wants to, make sure that you're ready to go and ready to correct those mistakes. All right, that's it for today's episode. And I'll be back with 2 more episodes with the No Ceilings guys. So hopefully you enjoyed Albert and Corey's takes on this episode. If you did, you don't have to wait too long. You can get another episode tomorrow and then either the day after tomorrow or possibly Monday. Haven't decided quite yet. So either Saturday or Monday. But either way, because Gavin has an interview coming up as well that I think you'll want to listen to, hopefully, too. So we're figuring out the schedule. But you're going to have 2 more episodes coming up in short order with the No Ceilings guys. So keep your ears out for that. On the next one, you're going to get to hear about Zach Edey, the 2-time player of the year, why he might be a perfect fit for a Tibbs-led team. And then also Ryan Dunn, who is, as Corey and Albert put it, one of, if not the best defender in the draft. Fantastic wing defender who can defend up or down. Sound a little bit like a guy on the Knicks. Yeah, that might have a little bit of OG Anunoby vibes. So maybe that the perfect guy to learn under OG Anunoby for a little bit and hopefully become another lockdown defender. So I'll talk about those 2 guys next time. And then in the 3rd episode, talk with Corey and Albert about just a laundry list of their favorite guys in this draft, which hits really hard from both of them because Corey's a big New York basketball guy and Albert's a big Knicks fan. So just a big time episode for that 3rd episode. So keep your ears out. Till next time, though, thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace out, everybody.